Hello, guys. We are going to listen the talk about accessibility by Paula. So go ahead, Paula. It's all yours.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. My name is Pabla. I work as an accessibility specialist here at Lenia Labs. And also I'm part of some organization called DALAT, which means Desarrollo Accesible Latinoamericano. And basically there we try to bring up all the accessibility issues into Spanish, which we consider is really important because right now most of the information is in English and all the content that we create is mostly in English. This is more than anything associated to the fact that they have better regulations than Latin America. So the idea is to create a good environment to push the creation of different laws across all Latin America and to create more accessibility professionals in the area. We are like a big net of resources, which is really interesting. So if anyone wants to know more about that, you can ask me later for the Slack direction or something. So just that was some kind of introduction. So now I'm going to talk more about what we've brought us here, that is this talk. So one question that is really important to make is what is accessibility? Because basically we can talk about that, we can find it in a lot of devices and different apps, but maybe we don't know actually what it is. So accessibility is related to the creation of any product, from a building to a keyboard, for instance, considering diversity in the process. This allows more users to interact with the product, including people with disabilities. So the first thing that we need to know is it's not only about people with disabilities, it's also about diversity. And this is really important, and I'm going to talk about that later. So keep that in mind. Yes? Oh, okay. Well, if the product is a website or an app, we're talking about web accessibility. And this is where we stand for right now. Something that's important is that we need to focus about who are going to use our product, and we need to come up with better understanding of all the users that we are having for our product. We usually don't do that, and we always think that the average people that use that is just people with all their capabilities and they can do anything the same way we do, but we have to think that it's more than that. So the name of the talk was ALI, and the question is, what does it mean? ALI is an abbreviation for accessibility, and basically it means that the word was way too long and they wanted to shorten up. So what they did was counting the number of characters in the middle, that's 11. So they create this word that sounds like ally. So it sounds like ally, but it was like just this game of words and we just use it that way. But the irony there is that actually it's not an accessible word because it has numbers on it. So if you read it with a screen reader, you will realize that it says A11Y. So it's like, it makes no sense at all. So that stays like an inside joke, but they basically use it even though it's, sorry, it's not accessible at all. So, like I said before, accessibility means inclusion and representation. This means that when we consider people with disabilities as users during our creative process, we're representing a portion of society that is often left behind. This means that we can talk about diversity in population. Around the 15% of the world's population lives with some form of disability. And that's something that they live all their lives with. But actually, there are more situations where you can have some kind of disability. And this is the point where we need to redefine what disability is. So I brought this from some manual from Microsoft about design that says that disability is not just a health problem. It's a complex phenomenon reflecting the interaction between features of a person's body and features of the society in which he or she lives. This means that actually disability is diversity, and what we create are the barriers that doesn't allow them to live the same way other people can do it. So when we start thinking that way, we realize that we all can have any issue to interact with what's around us. In this case, we can talk about disabilities in a permanent and a temporary or a situational way. For instance, to touch, a permanent situation is if you don't have an arm, so you can use only one. But if you hurt your arm, you have a temporary disability because you can't use your arm neither. And if you're holding a baby, you can't use your arms neither. So basically you have different instances where you can't interact with something in the same way. Happens the same to the sight or the hearing or also the speak. So basically we have to think that the different ways that we are going to interact with something are associated to our environment and what's happening to every person at that moment. This is really important because that makes us think that we can also be in that situation. And that creates more empathy and creates better products, basically. Because if we are thinking, okay, I'm going to use this kind of colors, but if I go outside and I don't have enough contrast with the sunlight, I won't see anything. So I should rethink the kind of colors that I'm going to use. These kind of things are really important every time we create something. And the good thing is that we can also put into other people's shoes that way. Because I know that sometimes it's kind of hard to think how other people will use our product. But if we think about ourselves in a temporary disability situation, maybe we can relate better. I'm going to mention a bit about regulations. These regulations are basically the ones that you might heard when you create something for USA. So maybe it will help you in your work. One of them is the ADA. The ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act. It was created in 1990, so it's kind of outdated. They tried to update it in 1918, if I'm correct. But even there, they didn't add, which means they didn't add any regulation about websites. They added some things about how the bills should be created to make it accessible, but not about websites. But anyways, there is like a correlation between buildings and their websites. One big and really important example was Domino's Pizza, that were sued because they didn't have an accessible website where you can buy food. So the irony is that if you create a building where I can buy food, but you don't allow me to buy food by internet because you don't have a good page, it's discrimination. So that was the base of why they sue them, and the user won because actually a website is kind of an extension of the building we're talking about. So this is like the regulation everyone stands for when they talk about accessibility. One word that is used that we actually shouldn't do it, but it's heard so much, it's ADA compliant. Being ADA compliant in USA means that you have a certification that says that you have your building in conditions for people with disabilities. But actually, you can't certify that for websites yet. So the idea is that regulations change at some point. The Section 508, it's a bit outdated also, and basically is related to it says that federal agencies need to create their products, such as technology, online training, and websites accessible for everyone. This means that federal employees with disabilities are able to do their work, and people with disabilities that need to search for something, they need to do it in an accessible way. But it only stands for some kind of companies. So it's not enough neither. What we use in general is the WCAGs or WCAGs or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. The last version that we are using is the 2.1, that it was created in 2018. And that way, what we do is to cover a lot of characteristics that we need to know. A lot of sorry. Okay. A lot of characteristics that we need to know about a web page. This is literally a guideline. So it's divided in different principles that there are 4. There is perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. These principles basically are the foundation of how a web page should be to be accessible. Inside these principles, we have guidelines. These guidelines are 13, and they give you like basic goals to make accessible as a website. But anyway, anyways, you don't have to test that. What we need to test are the success criteria. Those are a lot, and you don't use all of them at the same time, because basically you have some elements in your web page and you don't have others. These success criteria are the requirements and conformance testing basis. So what we do is use this guide to check that everything that we are creating in our website it's the way that it's supposed to be. What we use is to the AA level, which is the middle ground between the blockers and something really, really specific. If you want, later I can show you how the WCAGs are, but basically it's a long, long list of steps and things that we need to check, and we can find some filters that will help us to understand what we need. So if we need to check accessibility on images, we can look for the instructions of which elements an image needs to have, basically, and that with every element we use, like tables, lists, or headings. One question that is important is, how do we apply accessibility into our products? We have basically two ways. One is we just create anything, and at the end of the process, we just do an audit. An accessibility audit gives you thousands of errors that you have to change and basically create again your product. So it's not that useful when you are creating something. It's like a way to save you when you are having a lawsuit. But actually, when you need to create something, it's not the best approach. So what we need to do is to consider accessibility in every part of the process. For instance, a product manager will need to know the scope and which operative systems you will work with, which browsers you will support. That's part of accessibility as well, because you have one principle that is robust. That means that your page should be supported in the most quantity of browsers possible. And this is important because not everyone has the same device. One good example that I can give you about that is that when you use Instagram, you can change the font when you write something in your post. Older phones with older Android, for instance, they can't read that. And the font appears like little squares. And people can't read what it says there. It doesn't even support an older font. So that kind of things are important, and they need to be thought from the beginning. The UX and UI team are the ones that create basically the design. And there are a lot of visual elements that we need to consider there. One example is the color contrast. This is really important because basically we need that every color that we use stands out against the background. And this is associated not only because they are different colors, but because how much light they provide. So there is a series of tools that we can use to measure that. They also need to design if the links are going to be links, if the buttons are going to be buttons, how the graphics are going to look. So all these kind of elements that are mostly visual are related to the UX and UI team. Later in the developer team, what we need to consider is how we are going to write our semantic HTML. This is really important. We are used to create everything so mechanically that sometimes we don't stop to think what we're writing or why. And something that I use as an example all the time is the heading levels. We used to relate heading levels to size, the size of the font. And actually the heading levels are the ones that create some kind of tree and relationships between the elements on the page. So it's really, really important to consider which heading we are using in every element, and don't use it just because I like this size of font better. At the beginning, I know it's hard to understand a few things because we are just doing the same thing all the time in the way that we've learned, but actually we need to reconsider this kind of things because it will help us in the future. And around testing, it's important because testers basically will need to listen to all the page with the screen reader and see if every element is actually placed in the right way. Listening to a web page that is not well built with a screen reader is a nightmare. And I would like to make like a second meeting where we do a practical stuff and we listen to a page that is not correct. So you will realize how people that's blind have to deal with a website, which is really, really confusing sometimes. And it's a struggle, actually. It's really important. Other thing that we need to test is how to navigate a web page only by keyword, which is really important, and to see that the focus is always there. Sometimes they create a page and remove the focus because they think it doesn't look pretty, but actually the focus help with navigation when you don't use the mouse. So if you start pressing tab button and you have no idea where you are, there is a big accessibility issue, and it happens all the time. One thing that it's important is to talk about which kind of tools we are going to use to test accessibility. But this is not only focused on testers, but also in every part of the process. The screen reader is going to help us every time we talk about code, because basically they use the DOM to create an idea of what the page is about, and they read that to the user and explain them every element inside a page. We have different screen readers. We have some paid like JAWS. We have a free one like NVDA that also is created by blind people, which is amazing because they already know what they need. And we have another ones that are incorporated to the same operative system of the computer as VoiceOver. Android also have his own screen reader. Windows also have one, but it's not that good. So sometimes the best thing is to download NVDA and use it there. And on the cell phones, yeah, the best way is to use the accessibility that it's associated to that mobile. Later, we have contrast checkers. This is one good tool that we can use also on UX and UI, not only for testing, but also to create some good color palettes, which is really important because sometimes we choose some colors that looks nice, but against a white or a black background, they don't create enough contrast. So we can choose better colors or create the right relationships against those colors. And we use this kind of tools for that. An example that I have for a tool that's online, it's called Tanauru. And the good, and the good thing about that is that you can put two colors and they can give you ideas of colors that actually have enough contrast. You also have some extensions for Chrome, for instance. And the one that I use that is an app, it's called Color Contrast Analyzer. The good thing about that is that it has a Droplet and you can use it basically anywhere in your computer. So you don't need to check only accessibility in a website. You can do it locally. You can do it on a PowerPoint. You can do it anywhere. Other tool that we'll need to use is a keyboard because we have to test keyboard-only navigation. Same for Zoom. It's really important that we check responsiveness of the websites because basically when you make Zoom to see something because the font is too small, sometimes the elements just go all over the place. So responsiveness is part of accessibility as well. And also there are some content guides that are related to, some content guides that are related to the content that we actually provide. People that has some cognitive issues can't understand exactly everything that we write, so we need to be the most simpler that we can. And this is really important. We always forget about that. Also, we need to take care of the fonts that we're using, because people with dyslexia and other problems, basically, they can't understand exactly every font that we provide, so we need to be careful with that. We need to align everything to the right, to the left, sorry. So all that kind of things are important to create a more accessible content as well. And this that will be useful for developing are the automated tools. There are some automated tools that tested accessibility over the code. For example, eggs or axe, it depends on, or axe. This tool, basically what does is to compare everything you create in your code with the WCAGs. But it's not that good. It covers about 15 to 30% of errors. So you can use it when you're doing your unit testing and check some instance of that. You can check that all your images had an alt text, which is truly really important. You can check that you're not missing any heading. It won't check that you are using them properly, but it would check that you don't skip any heading. You will check that you're using all your labels, that your forms are well created, that you're making an accessible table. So I think it's really important that every time you create anything, you need to at least check it with this, that you're not missing the most important parts. It doesn't mean that you're covering everything in accessibility, but it's actually important to use it. You can use it as an extension for Chrome. Firefox also had some accessibility feature as well, that it comes with the inspection panel for developers. That later you have another paying check services that basically, if you want somebody else to check all these different errors and stuff, you can do it and pay for that. And also you have code scanners that basically it's a site where you introduce your entire code, and then what happens is that this read it and see if you have any error there. But again, you also need to do manual testing, because this won't check that you have a good keyboard navigation unless you're using some stuff like tab index, and it will recommend you to not use it and that kind of things. We have to learn how to use these tools though, because sometimes you will have some best practices that are not actually errors, but there are suggestions on how to create a more accessible web page in a way that won't give you any trouble in the future. So we need to get in touch with the WCAGs and also to these tools to understand how to create a better code. So the last thing I want to talk about is just a few common coding errors for accessibility. One is to forget about the alt text on images. This is really important. Not only the images that are PNG or other formats, but also the SVG images, they have a title attribute that is important. So at least what I have as a recommendation for devs is you always put alt and leave it blank. At least you have it. Then you need to talk to the UX department and ask what you should write there. Why? Because this is really subjective and is associated to the vision that someone might have around its page. But never forget to use the alt tag. I think it's really, really important. Another thing that is important is that the forms need to have descriptive HTML tags. There is a proper way to interact with a form so you can understand everything that's going on there, and you can relate what you need to put inside, for instance, a form blank. So the thing is that sometimes people use placeholders, and the placeholders tend to disappear when you start writing. So there is a problem there that people doesn't remember what they have to write. So we have to avoid to use only placeholders as a way to describe what we need to complete in form. Later, we also have using a language attribute on HTML. This is like basic, really, really basic. We always forget about that because we assume that nobody's going to interact with that in some way, but actually it's the base of a screen reader. And if we provide in which language the page is written, the good thing is that the screen reader is going to choose a voice in that language. If you don't put it, and if I use, for instance, my screen reader in Spanish to read a page that's written in English, I'm going to have a really bad time because the voice in Spanish is going to read me everything in Spanish, but words in English. So it's horrible. I swear it's horrible, and I'm going to do some practical stuff someday to show you because you won't forget about that later. So please always put your lang attribute at the beginning in the HTML. Something that's important also is that when you use a link, you don't have to write the entire URL, you have to use a descriptive anchor. And this is important because sometimes people say, write something like, if you want to view more, click here, and the here is the entire URL. We need to give something descriptive. So we can use words like view more or see more or just more, because sometimes screen readers can navigate through the page only by links. So if I have 5 articles and each one only says more, I will never know more what. So we need to be descriptive when we use links. Something that is really interesting is the skip navigation links. And I'm going to show you really, really quick something. It looks like this. But what happens if I press up? I have this link that says skip to main content. What it does is to help me skip all this menu. And if I press here, it will lead me to the first search. This is really important, and we should use it in all the pages we create, because it will help us to skip all the navigation menu, and it will allow us to save more time if we only need to go through the page with the tab. I think that's really important, and nobody knows it's there, but it's hidden to the keyboard users, which I think is amazing, because that's an example that how your page will still look the same, even though you apply accessibility anyways. people tend to say that accessibility makes everything uglier or something, and actually you can have exactly the same page. And the other thing that we already discussed are the proper heading order, or when we structure a table, that we need to create headers for every column, for instance. So this is important because actually when a screen reader reads a table, they will just name each one of this, but actually what we need is to make a relationship with the headers or of each part of the table. So basically these are like the most common errors that we actually maybe don't know about, because we are creating in some kind of automatic way. So once you start adding these things to your daily coding, you will realize that everything is more accessible from the beginning. And I just leave you here 2 web pages. One is with 10 examples of ADA compliant accessible web designs. We already discussed this. ADA compliant is not a thing, but people still wearing that as an explanation of something. And this is really a design thing, that it says that if you put some background in a picture, you actually can read what it's written. And looks really a silly thing, but we never do it. So I think you have a lot of examples here about different things. For instance, how to create a form, which I think it's important, how to label them. And also you have the bad examples, and here you have 10 big companies that were sued. So this is just an introduction, and I think we can go a little bit more technical if you want to next time, so we can use it, use more code-related examples and stuff. But I think this was necessary, so we make more familiar with the terminology and why we need accessibility. So this is it, and if you want to do any question on it or anything, please, let's go to Spanish. I'm kind of tired of speaking in English right now. Sorry.
So the question we can do it in Spanish, right?
Yes, please.
Bueno, cambiamos a español entonces.
Sí, gracias.
No hay problema. ¿Alguna pregunta por alguien? Yuri estaba preguntando si podían compartir esos links después, los 2 links que compartiste.
Sí, ahí se los pongo en el chat.
Súper, súper. Así que ahí
Vale,
los mandamos los 2 juntos. Dale, Yuri.
Gracias. Tengo también otra pregunta sobre el tema de accesibilidad. Acabo de compartir acá por el chat de Zoom un enlace. Si podemos hablar un rato de la keyboard navigation. O sea, nosotros en DIMSUM tenemos un montón de componentes que queremos hacer accesibles, y a menudo nos encontramos con la duda de cuáles son las mejores teclas para asociar por las interacciones para accesibilidad.
Sí, generalmente lo primero que tenés que pensar es en los atajos que vienen en los screen readers, en los lectores de pantallas. Y lo que hay que hacer es evitar usar las mismas teclas, porque a veces si vos pones ciertos atajos o ciertas interacciones con una app o con un web, estás invalidando los atajos de los lectores de pantallas, y hay gente que está muy acostumbrada a navegar de esa forma. Entonces, lo que te conviene es primero tener una lista de atajos de lector de pantalla y evitarlos. Básicamente usarlos de base para elegir otros.
Y hay un lugar donde este trabajo, digamos, de mapeo se hizo, porque yo allí he compartido un enlace de Techniques Keyboards. Además, aparte de eso, que es fundamental, esto de no chocarse con lo del screen reader, pasa, por ejemplo, con la tecla up and down. y con el tab por navegar entre componentes, que hay veces que no queda muy claro si up and down deberían hacer un skip. Por ejemplo, en el chat acá de Zoom, si usas up and down dándole el focus a la chat, te hace scroll, y después si te metes en una bubble de un mensaje cualquiera, up and down sigue haciendo scroll por ese. Pero es una lista de digamos, textos. Un usuario no visual, para poder leer estas bubbles, debería poderse mover entre ellas con el teclado, ¿no? Y entiendo que allí puede elegir entre moverse con el tab o moverse con la arriba y abajo, ¿no?
Sí,
No,
ten en
no
cuenta
me queda muy claro eso, no me queda muy claro cuándo usar qué.
En realidad hay un montón de esas cosas que no están asociadas a una elección del desarrollador, sino que es cómo se maneja, por ejemplo, el lector de pantallas sobre la aplicación o la página. Entonces, si yo voy a navegar, por ejemplo, no es lo mismo navegar con VoiceOver que navegar con NVDA. Con NVDA, yo directamente presionando la tecla hacia abajo, me va a leer todo el contenido. No importa si se scrollea visualmente, lo va a seguir leyendo. Ahora, lo que yo puedo tratar de hacer es asociar el scrolleo hacia abajo a otro movimiento, o que cuando esté activo el lector de pantallas no scrollee hasta que llegue, por ejemplo, hasta el último mensaje que está leyendo. A veces pasa que vos vas navegando un menú y te lo va leyendo el lector de pantallas, y de golpe, cuando te diste cuenta, lo que te está leyendo y donde vos quedaste por mover la flecha son dos lugares muy diferentes. Asumo que te referís un poco a eso. Ahí vas a tener que buscar, porque la verdad que nunca lo tuve que solucionar ese problema, pero podemos buscar una forma de que en realidad el lector de pantallas, o sea, las flechas que yo presiono para el lector de pantallas y las que se van presionando para la navegación vayan al mismo tiempo.
Sí. Y también esto es parte, o sea, el problema es enorme, esto de la navegación con teclado. Este es parte del problema, también es parte del problema lo que no se tienen que pisar, pero la otra parte es directamente a nivel de design. Cuando se piensa una solución, como dijiste, se tiene que pensar desde el principio que sea accesible. Allí hay interacciones que estamos acostumbrados a no pensar en ellas. Por ejemplo, un listado con un scroll bar, cómo hacer scroll. Por un usuario visivo, la tecla arriba y abajo que hacen scroll aporta valor. Por un usuario no visivo, esto quita valor, porque él no ve el scroll.
Sí, en realidad no es que quita valor, sino que no debería dificultar la navegación por screen reader. O sea, no debería afectarlo en nada. Un ejemplo que me parece que es re importante, que está asociado también a la navegación, es por qué tenemos que usar links cuando son links y botones cuando son botones. Para interactuar con un link, solamente lo podemos hacer presionando Enter. Para interactuar con un botón, podemos presionar Enter, podemos presionar espacio, y deberían abrirse, por ejemplo, a veces cuando se usan botones para submenúes. Entonces, hay ciertos comportamientos que están esperados de cómo navegamos con teclado. Y si yo estoy apretando Enter o espacio y no me está haciendo nada, es porque el elemento que están usando está mal. Entonces, tenemos que siempre pensar en todos los casos al mismo tiempo, tanto con un lector de pantallas como de manera visual. Por ejemplo, para activar ciertos botones, podemos usar el espacio y seguir navegando. Pasa lo mismo cuando interactuamos con los radio buttons, con los checkbox. Entonces, tenemos que tratar de que todos los elementos estén bien usados, porque la gente ya de manera intuitiva sabe qué botón debería presionar para interactuar con ese elemento. Y eso va a pasar en general. Muchas veces no va a importar que lo visual y lo auditivo se muevan un poquito diferente. pero en general tenemos que lograr que todo ande igual, porque hay personas que usan lectores de pantallas, pero que todavía ven, solamente que tienen un poco de visión disminuida, por ejemplo. Entonces, obvio, yo no voy a querer que la página se me mueva de una forma mientras estoy escuchando de otra. Entonces necesito tener esa coherencia. Pero es importante que todos los elementos que yo use tengan la funcionalidad esperada.
Claro, ahí era, y por esto justo iba mi pregunta. Hay la funcionalidad esperada, según el enlace allí que pasé, son solo por algunos componentes muy sencillos. Después, cuando vos combinas los componentes sencillos en una funcionalidad más compleja, allí hay un vacío de ley, entre comillas, un vacío ¿sabes? No sé bien cómo hacer la mapa de un componente complejo hacia uno de los fundamentales, porque, por ejemplo, podemos tener un elemento que tiene funcionalidades ambos de botón, pero también de scroll, por ejemplo, el select. Tienes que poder seleccionar con Enter y tal, pero también puedes tener un listado de opciones que quieres navegar con las teclas, pero a la vez estas opciones pueden no entrar todas a la vez porque tienes demasiadas y allí tienes que hacer scroll y entonces las teclas que se suelen usar para hacer scroll, que son up and down, ya las estás usando para navegar y entonces allí me quedo un poco perdido. Deberías convertir la navegación entre las opciones con tab y dejar arriba y abajo como scroll. Está
No, en
bien.
realidad ahí usarías la navegación hacia abajo, se haría cuando vos viajas por cada elemento. ¿Entendés? O sea, si yo llego hasta el borde del elemento y tengo que pasar al siguiente, se me va a scrollear solo al siguiente elemento. Eso sería lo más intuitivo, que se vaya moviendo a medida que yo voy bajando. Y de esa manera te ahorras pensar el scroll como algo separado a la selección de elementos adentro de un dropdown.
Sí, esto es para nosotros que somos visuales, es obvio, pero un usuario no visual se va a encontrar dentro de una lista, se va a esperar un portamiento de la lista y no va a tener el portamiento de una lista, va a tener el portamiento de una selección.
No, eso va a depender de cómo creas vos los elementos, de qué elementos estás poniendo. Es un caso muy puntual y hay que ir viéndolo cómo lo vas creando en el código. Pero en realidad, a ver, vos vas, si es por ejemplo un menú, para vos interactuar con cada una de las partes tenés que apretar Enter. Si vos apretás solamente hacia abajo vas a estar navegando. Entonces, no va a haber interacción a menos de que yo presione la tecla para interactuar. El resto es simplemente navegación. Es más fácil si lo vas practicando y vos tenés un elemento en puntual y escuchás con el lector de pantallas cómo te va contando las cosas. Por eso me parece que si les parece y les interesa, podemos armar otra clase donde sea más práctica. Incluso con Martín ya habíamos hablado un poco de eso, con Martín Colazo, que está por ahí. Habíamos hablado un poco de la idea de dar algo más bien tipo tallercito, donde podamos ver realmente cómo se navega una página, cómo son los elementos, cómo podemos interactuar. Me parece que esto era como la presentación del tema y de por qué es tan necesario y de en qué estamos haciendo agua cada vez que creamos código, solamente porque no sabemos que es importante usarlo o porque no estamos acostumbrados, pero me parece que esto hay que ir mucho más profundo y aprender mucho más.
Sí, perfecto. Me parece, sí, para mí también necesitamos algo un poco más práctico. Es súper buenísima la charla que daste. También no sabía que era ilegal no incluir, digamos, en el código cosas por la accesibilidad. O sea, es que no es opcional, es que en América te pueden hacer una causa por
eso. Claro, o sea, no tenés una regulación específica que te diga no lo hagas o hacelo, pero si no lo haces, te pueden demandar. O sea que te conviene hacerlo ya y ahorrarte un montón de problemas.
Claro. Ha sido súper interesante. Esto cambia todo para mí. Este facto en sí es fundamental. Ya es fundamental hacerlo. Así que muy buena charla, gracias. Pero sí, espero la práctica porque
Dale.
necesitamos hacerlo.
Súper
Gracias.
interesante. Adelante, Alfonso, dale.
Igual creo que esa ley es como para cosas que tienen que ser como client facing, ¿cierto? No necesariamente, o sea, si es que la cuestión es abierta, tiene que tener AIDA compliance. O sea, idealmente que tenga, bueno, que sea accesible para todos, pero...
En realidad, cualquier página que tenga una interacción con el cliente, por ejemplo, si vos tenés que comprar, pedir un servicio, esto está dentro del título 3 de la IDA. Esas son las que están más expuestas. Pero por otro lado tenés, por ejemplo, la 508, que habla de cosas del Estado. O sea que en realidad está cubriendo varios aspectos al mismo tiempo, y generalmente te conviene que todo lo que vos estés generando lo sea. Porque vamos a ser honestos, el 89% de las páginas te terminan vendiendo algo, un servicio, un producto, te ofrecen una aplicación. Entonces, generalmente te conviene que todo lo que vos crees sea accesible. Páginas que son muy accesibles son, por ejemplo, la de Microsoft, la de McDonald's, todas las de Estados Unidos. Si vos vas a la de McDonald's en Argentina, no es accesible. Ahí está la ironía del peso que puede tener una demanda en otro país y las pocas regulaciones que tenemos en Argentina. Pero, digo, son páginas que ofrecen o servicios, o productos, o atención al cliente, o te contestan dudas, y todo eso ya tiene la accesibilidad incorporada.
Perfecto.
Súper. Este tema también es súper relevante, sobre todo para el equipo de IMSUM, que se encarga como de hacer toda esta integración grande, así que muchas gracias por la charla, Pablo. ¿Alguna otra pregunta de alguien? ¿Alguien más que quiera o aportar
Yo tengo
algo?
una consulta.
Dale.
¿Se me escucha? Buen día, soy Gabriel.
Bien.
Trabajo en el equipo de Trinet, en el UX de Trinet. Mi hermano mayor es ciego. Mi hermana menor va para allá eventualmente por una enfermedad congénita hereditaria, entre comillas, que yo no tuve. Mi hermano, él básicamente sus dispositivos le hablan a él. Él trabaja con computador, con celular, con todo eso. Y las cosas, él tiene como programas que le ayudan y que le cuentan lo que está ocurriendo en la pantalla, básicamente. Mi duda es súper específica. Cuando una persona desarrolla un sitio web o una aplicación teniendo estos estándares de accesibilidad, ¿estos programas también se complementan más o pueden empezar a chocar? Porque,
No, en realidad la idea es que faciliten la navegación de lectores de pantallas y otros programas que se usen de asistencia.
ya.
Porque como decía antes, los lectores de pantallas leen el DOM de las páginas. Entonces, mientras más organizado y estructurado esté tu DOM, más fácil va a ser para el lector de pantalla explicarte todo lo que está pasando.
Perfecto.
Así que es buenísimo en realidad generar una página que esté bien estructurada, con buenas relaciones, con buenas descripciones, porque eso facilita muchísimo la navegación para personas ciegas.
Perfecto. Bueno, muchas gracias. Era bien específica mi duda.
Ahora puedes crear mejores sitios para que tu hermano también pueda interactuar.
Sí, o sea, sí, siempre ha sido un tema, pero es que como yo crecí con él ya como con corte de vista, entonces hay un montón de cosas que para mí son mucho más naturales, digamos,
Claro.
que como para la gente, como por ejemplo, no sé, pues vamos en la calle y yo no le tomo el brazo a mi hermano, él si él quiere me toma el hombro,
Claro.
si siente que hay mucha gente, pero no sé, en la calle, por ejemplo, él va con su bastón o con algo y la gente realmente lo toma del brazo y obviamente, o sea, cualquier persona que le tomen del brazo,
No
de
le
la nada,
gusta, claro, es re
claro, y se
molesto.
asusta. Y mi hermano mide como 2 metros, entonces si se
Yo le doy
aburre
un
o algo,
bastonazo.
claro, entonces la gente, hay como, nosotros estamos en el ámbito de la accesibilidad, del diseño, de la web y todas esas cosas, pero hay todo un mundo afuera también que debe ser impulsado alrededor de todo esto para que esto se empiece a integrar, porque claro, siento que el trabajo de nosotros es súper importante respecto a eso, pero es súper nicho también.
Sí,
Si no se cambia como la cultura al respecto de la accesibilidad como en general, onda,
exacto.
incluso las calles como que va a ser un poco más lento. Y es
Sí,
necesario igual, pero
yo lo que uso como un poco de confort es pensar de que si nosotros vamos cambiando el código en el que creamos las páginas, le estamos haciendo una cosa menos tediosa a las personas con discapacidad. Entonces van a poder por lo menos interactuar en la computadora, que es algo que se está volviendo primordial en la sociedad, lo van a poder hacer con mucha más naturalidad y no se van a sentir frustrados cada vez que intentan navegar en algo.
Claro.
Entonces, les estamos volviendo la vida un poquito menos tediosa, y creo que eso es
Claro.
un gran aporte. Obviamente sí, necesitamos más rampas, necesitamos que la gente no mire a las personas con discapacidad como algo raro, sino pensar que es
Claro.
una persona con diversidad y ya, pero bueno, el cambio que nos toca a nosotros es el que nos compete en nuestro trabajo,
Exacto.
y está bueno hacerlo desde acá.
Sí, exactamente. Bueno, eso, muchas gracias.
No, gracias a vos.
Ya. Bueno, chicos, ahí les vamos a enviar el enlace de la que mandó Pabla también, para que todos puedan acceder a esas prácticas. Y también nos queda pendiente después de hacer el taller, sería súper bueno, sería súper útil también para todos. Así que, bueno, muchas gracias, Pabla, por tu presentación. Fue bien enriquecedora. hace, hace abrir un poco más la visión de lo que uno,
Sí,
de lo que uno está haciendo.
creo que ese era el objetivo, digo, si puedo, aunque sea plantarle la duda a una de las 50 personas que estaban acá sobre, che, ¿estoy creando el contenido bien o no? Creo que el trabajo está, y es como empezar a plantar esas semillitas. Obviamente que nos va a costar un montón, pero bueno, por ejemplo, en mi equipo en Trainet, yo les estoy, les estoy machacando desde el UX y desarrollo que lo empecemos a poner, porque lo tenemos que poner, porque nos lo pidieron, pero más allá de eso, una vez que lo incorpores a tus prácticas, te vas a dar cuenta que todo lo que haces va a ser así. Yo cuando aprendí a codear, que aprendí con Free Code Camp, ellos están orientados a accesibilidad. Entonces, lo primero que te dicen es poner texto alternativo en todas las imágenes. Entonces, para mí era algo normal, pero sé que hay un montón de gente que no lo hace porque aprendió a codear de otra forma, con otras personas o lo que sea, y no está orientado. O entiendo cómo usar los headings, por ejemplo, los niveles de headings, cosa que hay muchas personas a las que les cuesta entender que tienen que tener un orden lógico y estar anidados. Entonces, todo ese tipo de cosas depende mucho de cómo uno las va aprendiendo, pero una vez que las incorporaste, te das cuenta que las aplicas en todos lados. Entonces me parece que está bueno empezar a aprender a hacer eso.
Dale. Ya,
Bueno,
pues, muchas gracias,
muchísimas
chicos.
gracias por todo.
Voy a parar el recording ahora.
Dale.
Así que, vale.